A huge unanimous win at the Supreme Court for Donald Trump, but more importantly, it's a win for America, and we'll break down the details there. Also, MSNBC in full meltdown, not just over this decision, but in general, because Trump ain't going away. And of course, it's really about you not going away. We'll lay that out for you. And apparently, if you think that a African American is capable of obtaining a photo ID, you are in fact racist. I learned that from the Attorney General of the United States. We'll talk about that as well. Today, we're brought to you by the Electronic Payments Coalition. My name's Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry. I had to drink some water. Thanks for joining us here live this Monday on Rumble. Since it's noon Eastern, we're live on Rumble, and I hope you join us sometime live. Make sure you share our videos, whether you're watching us live or after the fact, and keep those comments coming. I'm getting to them. In fact, later today, I'm going to be responding to a ton of comments that we're seeing. Thank you for that. And thank you for subscribing to the show and to our podcast. All right. The big news today. Just 2 hours ago, the Supreme Court has announced their decision in the case of the Colorado Supreme Court trying to circumvent the presidential election and remove Donald Trump from consideration. 4 people in black robes deciding not just for everybody in the state of Colorado, but because of the way the Electoral College works, this affects every single American. And those 4 authoritarians didn't want you to be able to vote for Donald Trump. The Supreme Court not only decided that that was unconstitutional, they did it in a unanimous fashion, 9-0. Here's how MSNBC reported this story today.
The Supreme Court issuing a ruling on the Colorado ballot case. I want to go straight to Ken Delanian, who is outside the Supreme Court with this decision. Ken, what do we know?
Good morning, Anna. We've learned that it was a 9-0 decision ruling that Donald Trump can be on the ballot in Colorado and other states. Justices during the oral argument seemed very skeptical of the idea that one state could decide for the nation whether Donald Trump was an insurrectionist and was therefore disqualified under this 150-year-old provision. Now we know that there was not a single justice who held that view. So there were no dissents to this 9-0 decision ruling that Donald Trump can remain on the ballot in Colorado as voters go to the polls tomorrow during Super Tuesday, and also in Maine, where there had been a decision to disqualify him from the ballot. And this ruling, we understand, has the effect of prohibiting other states from attempting to do so. And that really reflects what we heard from both liberal and conservative justices during the oral arguments, Anna. For example, Elena Kagan confronting the plaintiffs, essentially saying, your problem here is that you're arguing that one state can decide for the nation who can be president, and no justice was willing to go along with that.
He seems kind of sad, doesn't he? Like, who kidnapped your puppy, Ken? Come on. Oh, no, we're just reporting the facts here, just the facts. Yeah, this 9-0 thing is huge. It's huge for our country. My God, if this were 6-3, only the Republicans voting one way or the other, or 5-4, we would have still sort of been dealing with the fallout of people like Elie Mystal or Jeffrey Toobin or like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez screaming that the Supreme Court is broken and then they're partisan and they need to pack the court or disband the court. You know, the way insurrectionists who hate democracy talk or certainly hate our Constitution. The fact that Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, was able to rally a 9-0 decision here is incredibly unifying around what should be a layup here, a slam dunk, frankly. Of course, one state can't decide these things. Of course, this shouldn't have been able to stand for various reasons, not just the constitutional separations of power and the role of states in electing a federal position, especially like the president of the United States, that is very unique in how it uses the Electoral College to determine the outcome. But more importantly, and most fundamentally, Donald Trump has never been convicted or even accused, for that matter, of insurrection. So it was impossible for the Colorado Supreme Court to be able to do this, unless, of course, you're an activist leftist. In the name of protecting our institutions, protecting our norms, and protecting our democracy, which, of course, we don't even have a democracy. We use democracy to select our representatives in this constitutional republic. But in the name of protecting all of those things, The left in this country, led by Joe Biden and led by the activist media, they have been motivated to tear down every institution and rewrite or bust apart all of the institutional norms that we have had in this country for over 200 years. That's the irony here. And finally, some cooler heads prevailed. Finally, some sanity. But if you watch the coverage here, you'll see that they weren't very sane about this. Let's watch a little bit more of how MSNBC reported the news, and then we'll show you some of the analysis.
And Lisa, you are looking through, we have our Lisa Rubin here with us. As you look through this decision that was just put on the website there at the Supreme Court, what stands out most to you besides the fact that this was a 9-0 decision?
It was a 9-0 decision, Anna, and the decision was decided on the grounds that Congress, not the states, has the power to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Still, you have 4 justices concurring in the judgment, meaning they agree with the result, but also concurring separately and saying that the way that they disagree with the majority or the per curiam opinion is that they don't feel that they needed to decide that Congress is the exclusive enforcement mechanism. Both Justice Barrett, who is concurring only for herself, and then Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, concurring separately, say they don't need to decide anything more than this is not a right that belongs to the states. But all 4 of them casting doubt on the idea that the exclusive mechanism of enforcement here is congressionally enacted legislation. That's important because one other way that you could find that someone is disqualified is through, for example, a federal court ruling, or you could find that someone is an insurrectionist through their criminal liability. So there are a number of different ways that I think these justices are raising Section 3 could have been enforced. And yet the per curiam decision says not only does the power not belong to the states, you have to have Congress act affirmatively in order to disqualify someone from the ballot.
Yeah.
Thank you for
and again, incredibly important that Chief Justice Roberts, despite some of the concurring opinions, and it was noteworthy that the 4 women justices all determined another path potentially on this as well. Roberts was able to get them all in a room and say, okay, but what can we all, 9 of us, agree on here? And he found that. And it's huge. You know, you talk about Joe Biden claiming that he's going to unify this nation and bring us together and find, trust me, on this Thursday's State of the Union address, Mr. MAGA fascist, you're undermining our Constitution, you're undermining our norms, you're racist because you don't want to give water to people who are standing in line to vote, Jim Crow on steroids, makes Jim Crow look like Jim Sparrow, all that stuff. That guy this Thursday is going to be Mr. Healer, Mr. Bonder, Mr. Unifier, Mr. I'm reasonable, I can reach across the aisle. Let's figure out what we agree on. Work with me, I'll work with you. That's what you're going to see because it's an election year. But for all that bull that he feeds you on a regular basis, this guy, he's done nothing to try to unify us. Chief Justice Roberts just did more to unify this nation around some basic constitutional norms than Joe Biden has ever done. We do have Donald Trump's reaction to this, as he stated on Truth Social, and that says everything. Big win for America. It really is. And I just want to be clear, you don't have to be a big supporter of Donald Trump to see that this is a win for America. Because anytime the Constitution and basic understandings of how this country is supposed to work is upheld, that's a win for all of us. You realize what would have happened if this was allowed to stand. What would happen every 4 years? States would figure out a way to prevent another candidate from being on the ballot. And then we'd have a complete mess. Frankly, it would be the undermining and undoing of the Electoral College. It would actually hand to people who hate the Electoral College and hate the Constitution another reason to try to move to a national popular vote, which would also be a disaster. Anyone who's sane and reasonable and actually has a head on their shoulders sees this decision for what it is, and even more importantly, sees what Michigan and Maine and just recently a traffic court judge in Illinois has been trying to do. They see it for what it is, which is left-wing extremism writ large in an authoritarian move to keep your voice silent. Anyone with a sane, rational head can see that, which means, of course, Keith Olbermann doesn't see it. Keith Olbermann is the opposite of sane, rational, and logical. And the nutbag Keith Olbermann says the Supreme Court has betrayed democracy. Think about what kind of twisted, addled mind you have to reach the conclusion that the Supreme Court saying that a state can't keep somebody off the ballot and they want ultimately the voters to have the final verdict on something, that's anti-democracy. See, that's what the Supreme Court said today. You think that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist, even though he's not even been charged with it, let alone defended against that charge or prosecuted in a court of law? You think he's an insurrectionist and he has no business being president of the United States? Let's let the voters decide that. That's literally the democratic process. But if you're a lefty like Keith Olbermann, it's a betrayal of democracy to let people's voices be heard. You have to have an advanced degree from some liberal arts Ivy League college, or in Keith Olbermann's case, Cornell, to reach a conclusion like that. Its members, including Jackson Kagan and Sotomayor, have proved themselves inept at reading comprehension. And collectively, I'm actually doing it like Keith Olbermann. And collectively, the court has shown itself to be corrupt and illegitimate. It must be dissolved. So, to protect democracy, America, and the Constitution, we have to dissolve the Supreme Court. And this guy is a hero. This guy is a hero. This is where they are, though. And it's times like this where it's really instructive to go back and see how these people first reacted to the Colorado State Supreme Court's decision back in December. So this was sort of an emergency appeal that was made to the Supreme Court, right? In December, late December, right before Christmas, the Colorado State Supreme Court decided, those 4 justices decided, that Donald Trump will not be on the ballot for the primary or for the general election. And so there was an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. The arguments were made in January, and now we have the decision today on March 4th. So back in December, what was the reaction? Well, let's look at our friends over at MSNBC and see the cool, reasonable, legal analysis that they provided.
So it's a great question, Mika, because there are numerous states. Minnesota, I think, is the best parallel because they held a similarly serious proceeding, but the state Supreme Court in Minnesota took the decision away from the trial judge and decided as a matter of law that they would permit Donald Trump to stay on their ballot. So to Secretary Johnson's point about this as a qualification issue, that's precisely what it is. And it's one for every state. And whether we think that that's politically feasible and politically desirable, that's how our system is set up to work. And as students of history, I think, recent history, we have to appreciate that Donald Trump pushed the lie, the myth that Barack Obama was not a natural born American citizen. And
this is beautiful. Hey, we need some constitutional legal analysis of the decision that came from the Colorado State Supreme Court here, keeping Donald Trump from the ballot under the guise of the 14th Amendment. So can you tell us what this is all about? And she didn't even make it a minute until she started waving the Donald Trump is the original birther, and that's the real problem here. What has that got to do with anything? But actually, it's got to do with everything. Because if you hate Donald Trump, you're willing to contort the language, the law, the Constitution, the Magna Carta, basic societal norms. You're able to twist all of it into the shape of an unrecognizable pretzel if that end is met, which is to stop Donald Trump. They are everything they accuse us of being. They are so blinded by their white hot rage of that man, but again, more importantly, of you. They will never get over you not voting for Hillary Clinton. And so 49 seconds in, she has to make the point about the birth certificate. Now she'll eventually bring this back around to the question of eligibility on the ballot. But it's obviously a completely gratuitous example, because guess what? The first birther in American politics against Barack Obama was actually Hillary Clinton's campaign, who raised the question of his eligibility during the 2008 primary process. Remember when they floated a picture of him in traditional Kenyan garb and referred to him as Barack Hussein Obama? Yeah, that was the Clinton people. And not for nothing, there were some birthers against John McCain because he was born in the Panama Canal territories back in the day. But no, it's got to be about Donald Trump, because Donald Trump fries their minds. So here she goes trying to make the case of why Donald Trump should be excluded from the ballot in Colorado based on a speech he gave on January 6th, because originally he wanted to keep Barack Obama from the ballot because he wasn't a natural-born citizen, allegedly.
And he did that because had he been successful, that would have meant that President Obama would not have been qualified to be on state ballots. That was, in essence, an effort by Donald Trump to keep Obama off the ballot because of a qualification decision. So the irony, I guess, is a little bit rich that we're at this point with Trump, where under a different provision, the 14th Amendment, his ability to qualify for the ballot is being considered. But at bottom, that's what this is. This is a legal decision, not a political decision. And as far as the law goes, for strict constructionists like conservatives on the Supreme Court who read the law, and if the law is unambiguous and clear, believe that they should follow that law, this is a straightforward decision.
No, it's not. And you can always tell when a legal analyst doesn't know a whole lot about the law and is instead a political analyst who wants to use the law and her basic understanding of the law to make a political point under the guise of legal analysis. You see the dig at Alito and at Clarence Thomas, these strict constructionalists, these originalists. Well, you'll just look at the letter of the 14th Amendment and it's a no-brainer. It's a slam dunk. It's easy. She's either ignorant of what a strict constructionalist is or an originalist is, or she's just lying to you to score political points. Either way, she has no business being on television. If you're actually a strict constructionalist and originalist, you know that the language of the 14th Amendment related directly to the Civil War and has never been employed in the way this court is trying to employ it against Donald Trump. It's never been used against an office like the presidency, and it's never been used by a state against a federal office holder. Also, you would know, if you were a strict originalist and constructionist, that years after the 14th Amendment was passed, specifically dealing with the Civil War, the Congress actually eased up the restrictions on people involved in the Civil War from holding elected office. So she's just a liar or completely ignorant. But it doesn't matter, because at MSNBC, the point had to be made that Republicans and conservatives and Trump supporters are evil, stupid, anti-American hypocrites. And when that's your main focus and your main goal and your entire modus operandi, then you're able to bring yourself to a point where you can say, yeah, and Colorado should be able to decide for the rest of the country whether he's even eligible to be voted for, because we're protecting democracy by removing people from the ballot. And she had more to say, though.
But as so many folks have pointed out this morning, it cannot be a straightforward decision because it involves Donald Trump, who on so many occasions has gotten the benefit of protections of the law, of safe harbors, of due process that lets him delay. Here, though, when the law is being squarely applied to him, he doesn't like that outcome quite as much.
Wow. I mean, again, you have to be a Trump-hating leftist to reach that point where you can say, oh, Donald Trump is just getting the benefit of all of these outcomes when it comes to the legal proceedings against him. Well, that's one way to look at it. Or the other way to look at it is all of the charges that have been brought against Donald Trump are completely politically motivated. You're using the law as a weapon to harm your political opponent. And we actually do have some structure within our legal system still barely standing that protects people from that kind of authoritarian, totalitarian, Marxist sort of attack. That's another way of looking at it. But I got to tell you something. In the immediate on the scene late December analysis of the Colorado State Supreme Court decision to keep Trump off the ballot, what you just saw from that woman is actually not the most outrageous. The most outrageous came from Mara Gay, who sits on the New York Times editorial board. Here's her succinct, sober, completely nonpartisan legal analysis of this decision.
To the Republican candidate's argument that this should be, the voters should have the say and not the courts.
Why are you standing with Confederates who betrayed this country? And this is what they're standing with, is the spirit of those Confederates rather than the Americans who came together after a long and brutal civil war that was fought to keep the Union together, and clearly saw a threat in ex-Confederates running for office, so much so that they amended the Constitution to prevent those traitors from running for office. That should send a message that our election system, our electoral system, can be used for nefarious purposes against the democracy itself. It's clear. It's clear as day.
You know what? She's right. I think everything that you just heard is clear as day. And it tells you everything you need to know about who's on what side of this issue. And now that you've walked down memory lane, let's just remind you of today's decision. 9-0. Clean sweep. Elena Kagan, Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown Jackson on the side of the Confederacy. Wow. That's a shame on them. Absolutely shame on them. And Mara Gay, the New York Times, Morning Joe, MSNBC, they hate you. I mean, they really hold you in the greatest contempt. We've got a little bit more on this decision and the reaction of The View and Whoopi Goldberg, and more MSNBC meltdowns, by the way, too, about some totally different matters. And we'll get to it in just a second. But real fast, I want to tell you about my friends over at handsoffmyrewards.com. Millions of Americans earn and use credit card rewards. I do. Corporate mega stores want to take those rewards away from you. Rewards we use on groceries, school supplies, the cash back to save on gas and grow our small businesses, travel miles we use to make memories. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill will eliminate credit card rewards. No more travel miles, no more cash back. When lawmakers help corporate mega stores line their pockets, American families pay for it. Tell your senator to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. You want to go to handsoffmyrewards.com to take action today. All the information you need, all the tools you need are right there at handsoffmyrewards.com. All right. Further on the reaction here, let's turn to the geniuses over at The View. It was Whoopi Goldberg who had to deliver the news. They went on the air right when this decision came down, and take a look at the funeral they were having.
The Supreme Court has just ruled unanimously that Colorado courts cannot keep you-know-who off the state's ballot for engaging in insurrection, finding that a state cannot make a call that could have a national impact on a federal election. Of course, unless it's about a woman's right to choose, but let's not get into that.
That's ignorant as well. What does the one have to do with the other? A state can't make a decision that's going to elect the outcome of a federal election as it would here in the Electoral College. And by the way, states do have the right to make decisions about the abortion issue. In fact, overturning Roe v. Wade gave the power back to the states, and it in no way affects an election. I mean, directly it doesn't, but the anger and contempt and venom in Whoopi Goldberg's voice there was palpable, and it didn't get any better when they handed it over to the lawyer, Sonny Hostin.
So that's why this decision was unanimous in judgment. But if you read the dissent by Justice Justices Sotomayor and Kagan and also Jackson, they are saying the Supreme Court went too far here because they answered a question that wasn't before them. The only question that was before this court was, can a state do this?
Mhm.
Instead, what they did was they insulated
Mhm.
all alleged insurrectionists from future challenges to their holding federal office. And it is a tenet of Supreme Court law. I am a Supreme Court bar admitted attorney. It says what it does today, the court should have left undone. And we always learn that in law school. The Supreme Court should just answer the question before it. And I had far too much hope that the court would be united in this and not overstep in favor of Donald Trump.
Let me just break down what she's saying here because it's critically important. Because the Supreme Court said, this transcends just Donald Trump, which is, by the way, what they're supposed to do. It's not supposed to be about Donald Trump. It's supposed to be about the principles. It's supposed to be about the Constitution. You want to talk about overstepping? Look at what the Colorado State Supreme Court did in overstepping. Look at what the left is doing. Look at how sad and upset she is, the contempt she's got for these so-called institutions that they're supposed to hold in such high esteem. But when it doesn't go their way, suddenly burn it all the hell down, right? What they said was, this isn't just about Donald Trump. You can't do this at all. This is up to Congress to do. It's called separation of powers. It's kind of the foundational building block of our constitutional republic. And one other thing, calling everybody insurrectionists. I know it's become this clever little jab that people in the media, specifically left-wingers, like to use, but sadly you see it used oftentimes on some of your favorite conservative or right-of-center cable news channels. They use this word insurrection. Can I tell you something? There have been over 1,000 people arrested for the events of January 6th. They have spent more money on any investigation or any federal police action in the history of the United States of America on investigating, arresting, trying, and prosecuting people involved in the events of January 6th. And do you know how many of those people have been charged with and or convicted with insurrection? Do you know how many? None. None of them. Not Donald Trump and not the grandma with the MAGA hat standing at the pillar because the nice friendly policeman opened up the door and let her walk into the rotunda. None of them have been charged with insurrection. But here's Sonny Hostin just blithely saying, all these insurrectionists. It's not just Trump, it's all the insurrectionists. There are literally not. She's a student of the law. She's got the bar qualification for the Supreme Court. Words matter, counselor. There are, legally speaking, literally no insurrectionists from January 6th. None. You can say some of them are trespassers. You can say some of them are vandals. You can say some of them are disruptors of a legal process or official government process. You can even say some of them are unpermitted paraders because they've literally been arrested for that. But you can't legally call any of them insurrectionists because they haven't been charged with insurrection. That's what. But if you're on The View, or even worse, if your main source of news and information is The View, well, you're angry today. You're angry today because of Sonny Hostin.
And I think what we saw was a court where justices that behaved in a partisan manner, and that disappointed.
Yeah, thank you, MRC and the folks at Newsbusters for that one. Yeah, partisan. It's a 9-0 decision is partisan. There's no pleasing these people. More on The View, though, here, because the one really important takeaway in one of these concurring decisions, or technically two of the concurring decisions, one with 3 justices and one with a solitary justice. The most important thing is what their body parts were. Leave it to The View to tell you all about the fact that women thought one way and men thought another.
Amy Coney Barrett, though, jumped on that opinion about the overstep of the punishment, that it shouldn't be left then to
Yeah,
Congress.
she had a concurring judgment.
Yeah,
as
concurring
well.
judgment, which I thought was important because we do talk so much about the partisanship of a group of people that should not be partisan. So that was reassuring to me. And of course, it was for women that were talking about that part. It didn't surprise me. I'd started to gain faith, as Sonny would tell us, like, this is going to get him. And I was like, But seeing it, I now get the chaos which would ensue. And I think it's important when you.
I'm gonna let you finish there, dear. But did you notice that? This is a legal proceeding. This is a legal proceeding at the highest level of our nation's infrastructure of jurisprudence. And the proceeding couldn't be more serious when it comes to maintaining any societal norms in our constitutional republic. And that is the role of the states in determining who is eligible and not to be on a ballot so that we, the people, can vote for them. But instead, for the ladies on The View and the ladies who watch The View, the entire thing boiled down to, this is going to get him. This is going to get him. And that, in a nutshell, tells you everything that's wrong with every legal proceeding against Donald Trump that we're seeing play out right now. You think it's a coincidence that all of these trials are happening in 2024, the presidential election year? From the E.G. Carroll case to the Alvin Bragg so-called hush money case, which is really about a non-disclosure agreement, to the classified documents case, to the insurrection case, to the Fani Weiss case down in Atlanta about the post-January 6th events, or actually the post-election events, and the attempts to actually get a legitimate count of ballots in Atlanta. All of these things happening all at the same time, and she just told you what it's all about. All of it is really just about, this is going to get him. Watch how she says it.
About that part. It didn't surprise me. I'd started to gain faith, as Sonny would tell us, like, this is going to get him. And I was like,
This is going to get him. This is going to get him. Not truth and justice will prevail. Not where a system of laws. Not the Constitution should be paramount. Not, let's not disenfranchise tens of millions of voters in this country. Nope. It's all boiling down to, this is going to get them. And this is why they're losing, by the way. I know a lot of people get worried. I get upset. They get concerned. I do too. But the only way I wake up every day knowing what's going on in this country, the only way I'm able to get out of bed and not just engage in our society, but participate and articulate my ideas and hopefully persuade some people about what's great about this nation, the only way I'm able to do it is to have some sliver of hope that our Constitution does prevail. And that's what we saw today. And that's why they're so upset. If you know someone who gets their news from The View, could you please reach out and talk to them? Maybe share this video with them, so they can see exactly how misguided they are because of the information that they get from these women. A little bit more here.
But seeing it, I now get the chaos which would ensue. And I think it's important when you don't like the outcome, which I'm not saying I don't, but that you look at the states that you would disagree with and what they could do in turn. Yeah. So I look at a Texas and Governor Abbott. I look at a Florida and DeSantis. If you're okay with Colorado doing this, you have to then be okay with these states doing what we've already seen them do with counter trigger law.
Yeah, and listen, let me just say for the record, if the entirety of their takeaway here is, yeah, in the long run, maybe this wasn't a good idea, because if it's okay for our state to do it, then we got to be prepared for their state to do it. Honestly, that's sort of a keep them honest kind of position to take, right? My dad used to tell me, whenever you have a moral dilemma, if you don't see the answer in scripture or your church's teachings, and you're really torn about something, first of all, you probably aren't really torn about something. You know what the right thing and wrong thing is. But if you really think it's a dilemma, honestly, more often than not, moral decisions can easily boil down to a very simple thing that your parents probably told you when you were a kid, which is, what if everybody did that? What would society be like if everybody did that? And that does sort of clarify these things. What would our country be if every state did what Colorado did? And suddenly things get to be pretty clear, don't they? That said, I want to prepare you for a segment of The View that I can foresee coming up in late June or early July. Because you see, this is just the first decision that the Supreme Court has to weigh with regard to Donald Trump in this election year. As you know, last week, the Supreme Court decided to take up the question of whether Donald Trump has immunity from the charges Jack Smith has brought against him based on the speech he gave on January 6th. And it really does all boil down to the speech he gave and maybe some text messages and some challenges to the Electoral College process after Election Day in 2020, leading up to January 6th. The Supreme Court will hear those arguments in late April, and then they will render their decision the last week of June, I suspect. And if they side with Donald Trump, well, hold on to your hats, because it's going to make today's View reaction look like, an episode of Blue's Clues. Without the charm, of course. Whoopi Goldberg gave us a projection of what that's going to look like on Friday when they were sort of musing about what a president can and can't do with regard to immunity or not. And, well, I'll let Whoopi take it from here.
Well, the Supreme Court won't hear oral arguments until the end of April. Now, let's look at a scenario where the Supreme Court says, yes, he has that. He has all those rights. He is immune from everything. Yeah. You know what Joe Biden could do since he is presently president?
What?
Whoa. He could throw every Republican in jail.
Yeah.
I mean, he could. I mean, no. This is not a good thing.
It's critically important that there was a smattering of applause there. The crowd thought that was a good idea. The left doesn't want to throw every Republican in jail. Only your leaders, or the ones that you want to vote for to be your leader. Only a good percentage of Republicans need to go in jail until the rest of you fall in line. In reality, the fact that this is the ultimate argument that Whoopi's got with regard to presidential immunity, I got a better scenario for you, and I will let's let her finish first, and then I'll give you the scenario of what could really play out with this immunity question. But here's how The View tackles this very important constitutional issue. And again, I just want to remind you, for many people in this country, this is their primary source of news, information, and analysis. What you're about to see. So it's no wonder why we're so divided. It's no wonder why we have so many ignorant voters in this country.
He can go. What this means is he could do anything.
Yeah.
He could dismiss everybody's debt.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of great stuff that could happen, but let's really look at what this means.
Yeah. So they're basically kicking the can down the road, though. They're not taking up this case immediately.
Right.
So what's their motivation then? If we all know that they can't do what you just said because of the extreme power that a president would have, what is their motivation for not doing it right away?
Well, unfortunately, some people are saying the motivation is that there are certain conservative justices that have been appointed by Trump that want to help him.
I see you, Sonny Hostin. I see you, and I know what you're doing there. Did you see how she framed that? There are some people who say, that way, whenever it comes back to sting her, she can say, well, I didn't say it. I was just telling you what some people said. You want to really know what the Supreme Court's motivation is for scheduling the oral arguments the last week of April? You really want to know? I've got really, really insider information here. It's brilliant insight that you're really going to appreciate here. The fact that they're waiting about 7 weeks before they hear the oral arguments. It's because they've got a full load of cases that they've been hearing since the first Monday of October. And they've got a ton of cases that they have to get to. A ton of arguments that need to be regurgitated and decisions that need to be written. And generally speaking, if it weren't potentially affecting the presidential election, they would never hear this case right now anyway. They would put it off until next year. But because of the immediacy of this, they're actually jump-starting this and hearing it rather soon. Sooner than good luck to you appealing something to the Supreme Court and getting oral arguments within 8 weeks of your petition. It doesn't happen. But somehow in Sonny Hostin's twisted little mind, this comes out as they're just trying to help Donald Trump. That's why they've delayed this. Bull. They're actually hearing it pretty quickly. But again, this is the kind of contempt that they hold the Supreme Court in. This is why you hear them say, as Keith Olbermann said earlier today, it's time to dissolve the Supreme Court or pack the Supreme Court. Remember how it was Donald Trump and MAGA fascist Republicans who were accused of undermining the institutions of the United States of America? Have you heard any of them undermine an institution like the Supreme Court the way they are here? Oh, but it gets even better. The reaction to this idea of whether President Trump has some level of immunity, if not complete immunity, from his actions as president of the United States, from civil or criminal prosecution.
And because we know the end result is if this case is not resolved by the time of the election and he, God forbid, becomes the president of the United States, the Justice Department policy is that you cannot indict nor put on trial a sitting president, right? And so it's his get out of jail.
Throw him in jail.
But it's his get out of jail free card.
No, I'm saying Biden could throw.
Yeah,
See,
Biden
this
could
is
do
a
that.
slippery slope
but
because if they give him this immunity,
What's good for the
What I
goose is
also
good
will
for
say
Biden.
is they're listening to these arguments in April. The end of their term is in June, right? They return again, I believe, in October. The Bush v. Gore case happened real quick. Do you remember
They know
that?
how to
The
do- they
Supreme
know how to
Court
do
knows
this.
how to work real fast.
That was the day democracy died.
By the way, this is the best. You election deniers out there, you Republicans, and here's Joy Behar saying that the Bush v. Gore was the day democracy died because the election didn't go her way. She's still a denier from 2000. Yeah, I wonder why the Supreme Court operated so fast there in December of 2000 in Bush v. Gore. Oh, maybe it was because a new president constitutionally had to be inaugurated by the third week of January. I'm sorry, but you bring criminal charges against a former president and the nominee for president, who is currently the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party. This is what happens because you're violating every single legal norm we've ever had in this country. Maybe the Supreme Court's going to be a little circumspect and make sure that they look at all of the facts in the matter before they come up with a decision, because it's not just about Donald Trump, as Whoopi Goldberg clumsily stated there. This is setting a precedent for the United States of America going forward, or for that matter, looking backwards. You see, I don't know, if it turns out that a president doesn't have immunity for their actions or their speeches during their presidency, I'm thinking the family of Laken Riley might have a wrongful death suit against President Biden for his border policies, or maybe for denying her civil rights, if it's a civil case instead of a criminal case. And speaking of denying someone civil rights, if I remember right, Barack Obama approved of a counterterrorism and counterintelligence investigation of Donald Trump as candidate for president, all based on a fraud that he knew about. John Brennan, the CIA director, actually informed Barack Obama that Hillary Clinton was peddling the Steele dossier full of lies about Donald Trump. And Obama, after Trump had won the election, Obama gave the green light for a continued FBI investigation into Donald Trump a week before he was inaugurated. You think Donald Trump maybe has a lawsuit against Barack Obama? Now, Barack Obama will say, you can't do that. You can't sue me. I was just doing what I thought was in the best interest of our country, acting as president of the United States. I have immunity. And of course, Donald Trump will say the same thing. I believed that our Constitution was being undermined. I believed that the electoral process was corrupted. This wasn't about me winning. It was about protecting the Constitution and the integrity of the democratic process used by various states to determine their electors to the Electoral College. Period. It's over. Of course, he has immunity. And we should want it that way. What's really instructive here is that when Whoopi Goldberg needed to make a case to explain the danger of presidential immunity, instead of the rather benign examples I just gave you, she had to go all the way to, well, Joe Biden could just arrest every Republican. They are warped. They are absolutely warped, damaged individuals. And the damage continues. MSNBC's complete and total breakdown over what's going on right now is something to behold. Most of it played out on Morning Joe over the last several days. And I want to share with you first a segment that they presented, basically calling any white rural voter who supports Donald Trump an enemy of the American people, a racist, an insurrectionist, a Confederate, whatever you want to say. They wheel in an academic from the University of Maryland to make the case for them.
Joining us now, Professor of Political Science at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Tom Schouler, and journalist and opinion writer Paul Waldman. Their new book, out tomorrow, is entitled White Rural Rage, The Threat to American Democracy. And Tom, we'll start with you. Why are white rural voters a threat to democracy at this point? You would think, as we pointed out, looking at Joe Biden's background and Donald Trump's, that the opposite would be true.
By the way, I do love that everything about this segment is seeped with stereotypes, racism, preconceived bigotry, and frankly, a lack of fundamental understanding of their fellow Americans. When Mika Brzezinski, an urban New York liberal who actually spends most of her time down in Florida with her new husband, Joe Scarborough, who is really just a Me Too situation with a happy ending, let's face it. Her view of American voters, well, yeah, you would think that white rural Americans would be more inclined to like Joe Biden since he's just a regular old guy from Scranton, and Donald Trump is this elite Manhattan rich guy, right? Which fundamentally misunderstands and demeans the so-called white rural voter based on, well, they're white, so they're going to identify, and they're, middle to low class, so they're going to identify the guy who came from nothing instead of the rich guy. Well, no, actually, believe it or not, Mika Brzezinski, white rural voters actually use their brains and actually evaluate an individual, not based on the color of their skin or based on their upbringing or what their socioeconomic equation is. No, they actually evaluate an individual, and especially a politician, based on their policies and their competence and their ability to actually execute the job of president of the United States. But you see, Mika Brzezinski, in her bigotry, there's no other word for it, would never afford that kind of dignity to the white rural voter. So the question itself is so revealing of who this woman is and what the mindset at MSNBC is. But then we go on. Again, the name of the book, White Rural Rage. Watch.
I mean, we lay out the fourfold interconnected threat that white rural voters pose to the country. First of all, and we show 30 polls and national studies to demonstrate this. So we provide the receipts in Chapter 6. They're the most racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, and anti-gay geodemographic group in the country. Second, they're the most conspiracist group. QAnon support and subscribers, election denialism, COVID denialism and scientific skepticism, Obama birtherism. Third, anti-democratic sentiments. They don't believe in an independent press, free speech. They're most likely to say the president should be able to act unilaterally without any checks from Congress or the courts or the bureaucracy. They're also the most strongly white nationalist and white Christian nationalists. And fourth, they are most likely to excuse or justify violence as an acceptable alternative to peaceful public discourse.
So you mentioned a lot of negative factors about this demographic.
Yeah, and by the way, that's why we booked you on the show, because that's exactly what we wanted you to do. These are the people who say we had to have Joe Biden in office to unite our country and bring us together, to find harmony over the things that we can agree on, to stitch back together the fabric of our nation, like Betsy Ross so many years ago with that first American flag. These are the people who demanded on having Joe Biden in office to reset the norms in our society and get past the vitriol and demonizing of our political opponents so we can hold hands, sing kumbaya, and march down the street together in one direction, the leftward direction. And now they're sitting here saying that you're racist, you're xenophobic, you're intolerant, you're undemocratic, you're totalitarian. And they get applauded. They get published. They get feted. They get celebrated in the elite corridors of the American media. I think it's possible, after seeing the results of the riots that Black Lives Matter led after the George Floyd incident of summer 2020, after seeing the destruction and arson and theft and death and the rising crime rates we're seeing in urban centers across this country, I think it's possible that an academic could actually write a book called Black Urban Rage. But they wouldn't, because that would be racist. Just like white rural rage is. But you see, that racist is welcome in the morning coffee segment of Morning Joe. But that's not even the craziest thing we saw on Morning Joe. Watch these two. These two are highly paid political analysts and communicators. And watch where they are right now. In what? This was the first day of March, 2024. We're still 8 months away from the election, 9 months away from the election. And look, the fevered frenzy they're at already.
What are we supposed to do with that?
I mean, see,
why do people are actually voting? Is there really one person voting for
Not
that
just
guy?
foreign languages.
How stupid would you have to be?
Foreign.
He can't complete a sentence. He can't complete a thought. He talks about Crooked Joe is the blood of countless victims. This is vicious violation. I mean, he just
does he even think about what he's going to say? Does somebody give him a little piece of paper or something? Because that's clear. He doesn't even think.
Well, but I think I really don't know, Willie. Maybe you can give us some insight on it. But he looks so lost and confused. He jumbles his words. He tries to read a little bit.
He's trying to be nasty.
And then, trying to be nasty. But when he does that fifth grade or really 5-year-old taunt, Newscomb, is that his name, Newscomb? I mean, talk about losing about 18 miles off your fastball. Yeah. I mean, this guy's pitching 72 miles an hour down the middle of the plate. I mean, it's not good. And again,
yeah, and he's still beating your guy. This is the sad reality at this point for these people who have championed Joe Biden and lie about him and look the other way and don't come to the realization that Joe Biden is a complete and total disaster at every level. They spent over a minute here discussing how horrible Donald Trump is, how feeble he is, how incapable he is, and yet he's still beating your guy. So, I mean, come to that reality. And poor Willie Geist gets drawn into this. Willie's like, please don't turn my camera on. Just let those two do it. Did you see the exchange, the overlapping talk? Something tells me that's how they watch a movie together in Joe's Panhandle mansion there in Florida. I think we got a little insight into their sort of pillow talk, their little romantic, sort of verbal foreplay before things get hot and heavy.
And I just have to bring it up. He's lying, as he always does, when he talks about the border. When he ran and was talking about the border wall, Barack Obama and Joe Biden had illegal border crossings on the southern border at a 50-year low. He's just making this stuff up.
And again, he still beat your gal, Hillary Clinton, at that point. And you're right. I mean, it wasn't at a 50-year low. That's a completely warped stat. But yeah, if your point, Joe, is that the border right now under Joe Biden in just 3 years is about 1,000% worse than it was back in 2016 when Trump first raised the issue of border protection, you're 100% right. It is horrible right now. It is beyond description right now. And Trump won when things weren't nearly as bad. So what you're seeing here and what I'm showing you is an MSNBC meltdown as they realize just how bad things are. Here's how they started the day today after Donald Trump's rally in Richmond and a couple of other appearances.
It's an incumbent that would weigh on me. You know, Barack Obama was getting in the 90s in primary contests. Joe Biden, look what Joe Biden's doing. Joe Biden's doing exceptionally well in primary contests. So it does. All of this has to be weighing on him, plus 8-9 years of age. All this weighing on him, and he's not healthy. You look at Joe Biden. He exercises every day. You look how fit and trim he is. People are obsessed with how he walks.
His doctor told us why that happens.
Yeah,
and that's a condition he's had for a while.
Yeah,
Joe Biden's fit and trim. Can I just tell you something? If I ever get to be as fit and trim as Joe Biden is, could you please intervene and get me to a doctor? Like a serious one, not the quack that he's seeing right now. Joe Biden's fit and trim. The guy is emaciating away as men of a certain age do. But this is the role that they have to play now, these two. I mean, listen, they're paid well, so I guess they're going to do their job. But they actually have to bring themselves to say, yeah, Donald Trump, he's got some serious health problems. But Joe's ready to win the decathlon.
Tingling in his feet, but also he has a stutter, and he's had it for decades.
Here we go.
He's had it for decades. Everything.
They're back to the stutter thing. They're back to the stutter again. I'm sorry. He read from a note card on Friday talking about how they're airdropping supplies to Ukraine. He was reading it from a note card. And after the fact, John Kirby had to clear up the fact that he didn't mean Ukraine. He meant Gaza. But it actually said Ukraine, but his brain said Gaza. That's not a stutter. That's your brain malfunctioning. But this is what they got to do.
Thing that he is doing, he has done. That's been baked into the Biden situation that we have known for years. And while he is older, and he should own that, and he should joke about it, and he should address it, I think we're at a point now where for Trumpers on Fox News, for the MAGA right, for Donald Trump himself, they're at an inflection point for making fun of Joe Biden's age, for making it an issue. But it's actually coming back to haunt them in a really big way.
It is.
As Donald Trump gets on stage time and time again and has these weird moments that are scary. It's
so strange. And if you ask me, what were the two issues that were going to be Joe Biden's big?
Yeah. Listen, let me just tell you something. The one thing that you need to know, and the big takeaway you have to have from all of this that you're seeing on MSNBC, is that no one watching that program right there, Morning Joe, is even thinking about voting for Donald Trump. They are literally preaching to the choir, but this is where the danger comes in. You remember the reaction when Donald Trump won in 2016. You remember people screaming in the streets and crying and renting their clothes. How did this happen? And that's when the Russian collusion hoax narrative actually took hold, because the only possible way that Donald Trump could win and Hillary Clinton lost is if it was stolen. Not just stolen, but if Donald Trump was guilty of treason and colluding with our foreign enemies to steal the White House. That was only believed by people because this is what they heard on a daily basis on this show, on MSNBC, on CNN, on the networks. It's all they read in the New York Times. It's all they saw from their friends on social media, because other ideas and voices were being censored or sequestered on social media. They were able to quickly believe that Donald Trump stole the election with Vladimir Putin's help, because they were told every single day that there was no chance he could win. And now they're doing it again. There's no chance Donald Trump can win. He's got mental problems. His brain doesn't function. He's too old. Joe Biden is fit and trim, fit as a fiddle, and his brain's never been sharper. And people believe this. Well, not everybody, but the people who watch this show do. And this is the danger when you're actually doing media and political commentary that is rooted in lies. This is the danger, is that the people are not just uninformed, they're ill-informed. And then when something happens that they weren't prepared for, they're willing to believe anything. And it's going to happen again. Meanwhile, one other thing that you heard on MSNBC that was even crazier than all of that, Michael Moore just throwing down with the terrorists. I mean, we call the protesters who are flying Palestinian flags on the streets and ripping down statues and screaming xenophobic river to the sea chants and siding with the perpetrators of the October 7th terror attacks. We call them pro-Hamas. Many of them are, but most of them are just misguided, ill-informed, unintelligent, ignorant, and they think by standing up for the little guy, you know, the Palestinian refugees, that's not pro-terrorist, it's just pro-oppressed. But with Michael Moore, iconic representative of left-wing thought in America, he literally is pro-Hamas.
What is the crime? Because according to my knowledge of history, the enemies of Israel who have been persecuted, the Israelis, the Jewish people of this world have been persecuted for 5,000 years. But for the last 2,000 years, most of the persecution has come from white, European-centric Christians. That's been your enemy. No Palestinian helped to build Auschwitz. No Palestinian stood on the docks of New York City when boatloads of Jewish refugees trying to escape the Holocaust came here to be protected by this country and were turned away at the docks in New York and sent back to Germany to die. No Palestinian did that. No Palestinian ran the Spanish Inquisition. Your enemy is not the Palestinian people. It is white, Christian, European people who have been slaughtering Jews for the last 2,000 years. And let's just call it for what it is. But why are they in an open air prison? Why are 2 million of them in an open air prison? What is the...
By the way, somebody should gently let Michael Moore know exactly what the so-called Palestinian leadership in the Middle East was doing during World War II, because they may not have built Auschwitz, but they were pretty friendly with the guy who did build Auschwitz. But at least he's consistent. He hates white Christians, mostly Americans, but he'll even stretch it to Europeans if there's money in it. And no matter what the issue, that's the stance he's going to take. And by the way, as a Michigan native and lifelong Tigers fan, if you're going to do this again, take that hat off your head. Now, if you think that an African American in the United States of America is fully capable of getting a driver's license or even just a state-issued photo ID card, you, my friend, might as well put on a hood and burn a cross on the front lawn. And that's not just me saying it. It's the Attorney General of the United States of America, Merrick Garland.
The right to vote is still under attack. And that is why the Justice Department is fighting back. That is why one of the first things I did when I came into office was to double the size of the voting section of the Civil Rights Division. That is why we are challenging efforts by states and jurisdictions to implement discriminatory, burdensome, and unnecessary restrictions on access to the ballot, including those related to mail-in voting, the use of drop boxes, and voter ID requirements. That is why we are working to block the adoption of discriminatory redistricting plans that dilute the vote of Black voters and other voters of color.
How a drop box, by the way, has anything to do with the racial makeup of voting area, I'll never know. But it does shed quite a bit of light on some of the analysis we've seen on alleged ballot stuffing in those drop boxes. But there's Merrick Garland pandering to a black church. I wonder if Merrick Garland could address every single individual person there on the stage behind him and explain to each and every one of them why they are incapable of getting a photo ID. I'd love to hear him say that. I want him to, that minister, I'm guessing he's a minister of sorts, wearing the tie right behind him there. I want him to turn to him and say, by the way, sir, I just want to be very clear and lay this out for you in no uncertain terms. The idea that you cannot vote unless you have a photo ID is racist, because I know that you, as a black man in America in 2024, are incapable of getting a photo ID. Now, I've had a photo ID, Merrick Garland would say, since I was 16 years old, but you see, I have an advantage over you. I'm white. In fact, literally the whitest man. He looks like Casper the Friendly Ghost. You're going to a black church and you're going to be videoed giving a speech, do something with the makeup. You couldn't be any whiter, and that's what they're all thinking there on stage too. I want to know from him specifically why it is racist and a violation of civil rights to demand a photo ID, especially considering the fact that having photo ID requirements literally protects a vote. It literally protects. If you go to vote and you are eligible to vote and you have every right to vote, and you vote for candidate A, and somebody else standing in line right behind you isn't eligible to vote and shouldn't cast a vote, but they're there because there was no mechanism to ensure that they were who they say they are, and they vote for candidate B, well, guess what, man? Your vote for candidate A is eliminated because of someone who shouldn't have voted in the first place. Demanding ID for voting purposes protects the integrity of the vote, which is what civil rights, when it relates to voting rights, is all about. Every vote should count. And those votes don't count if you've got dirty votes. Also, last I checked, it wasn't too long ago when this guy, the Attorney General, helped engineer a completely unprecedented and despicable demand for vaccinations in this country. Of course, we know now that they weren't even vaccines. They had to change the definition of vaccine to push the thing through. But back in the day, I'll be honest, I got the first 2 shots. Had to. Didn't have a choice. Literally did not have a choice. And when I went to get my shot, guess what they asked for? My identification. You know why? Because his Justice Department made sure that those were part of the rules. Did anybody petition and say, wait a second, I'm trying to be protected from COVID-19 and you're demanding that I have a photo ID? Well, I'm incapable of obtaining a photo ID. This is discriminatory against me. No, that didn't happen. You have to be a left-wing Democrat in this country to be so racist that you not only think that a person of color is incapable of getting a photo ID, but even worse, and this really is worse and more racist, you're not going to do anything about it. All you want to do is, I want to make sure that you can vote without a photo ID. And that's the beginning, middle, and end of my concern about you and your incapacity of getting a photo ID. No, you know what? I'll tell you what. You're really going to convince me that people of color are incapable of getting a photo ID in this country? Tell you what, I want to work with you to fix that problem. Because if you don't have a photo ID, you're not a fully functioning member of our society. I actually care about people of color. And if they legitimately are incapable of getting a photo ID, we got to fix that, because they got to have a bank account. They should be able to cash a check. They should be able to travel. They should be able to get a shot or a doctor's appointment or anything that a fully functioning member of our society has the ability to do, only if they've got a photo ID. But this guy and his party and his president, the Democrats, they're just fine with people being completely removed from our society and incapable of doing anything like, oh, I don't know, filing taxes or getting a job. They seem perfectly fine with that. That's kind of racist, too. Those people of color who can't get an ID, that's fine. Let them live on the margins. Of course, that's only if you believe the fake premise that requiring a photo ID is racist in the first place. I'd love to go visit Merrick Garland over at the Department of Justice and have a meeting with him in downtown D.C., just a handful of miles away from where I'm sitting right now. But to get into that building, I'd have to show the security people my photo ID. These people are the worst. And there's more. Alejandro Mayorkas, also in the Biden administration, he's pretty despicable too. He was asked about the killing of Laken Riley over the weekend. He was on Face the Nation. And I want you to watch how he responds to this question. And we're going to break it down here. But just understand something. The funeral was yesterday. You're the mother and father of this 23-year-old girl who just got brutally murdered by someone who should have never been in this country and was only in this country because of the result of this guy's failed policies. And watch how robotic he is. Even when he tries to be sympathetic and compassionate, he has to read it from a card.
A 22-year-old nursing student, I know you've been following this, Laken Riley in the state of Georgia was murdered allegedly by an undocumented Venezuelan migrant. The suspect had been detained by Border Patrol upon crossing, released with temporary permission to stay in the country. He then went on allegedly to commit crimes twice, once in New York for driving a scooter without a license and once in connection with a shoplifting case in Georgia. Did those states and their law enforcement communicate to the federal government that this had happened? Should this man have been deported?
We're going to get to his answer. And again, I want you to watch how robotic he is, how unfeeling he is, how dismissive he is. He won't even say this young woman's name or the family name. But I also, as you watch that, I want you to remember what the question is, because they do this. They are masterful at this. The question on the table is, was the Department of Homeland Security or ICE notified by local law enforcement in New York or in Atlanta about the fact that they had just arrested an illegal alien on criminal charges? Now, of course, the root of that question is sanctuary city policies. Sanctuary city policies that dominate because of this man's political party, because of the president of the United States championing sanctuary city policies when he ran for president. That's the root of the question. And the question is, were you notified? Now watch how he answers everything but that.
A few thoughts. First, Margaret, first and foremost, an absolute tragedy. And our hearts break for and our prayers are with the family. Number one. Number two, and importantly, as a prosecutor, having prosecuted violent crime and other crimes for 12 years, one individual is responsible for the murder, and that is the murderer. And we work very closely with state and local law enforcement to ensure that individuals who pose a threat to public safety are indeed our highest priority for detention and removal.
But are you saying there that the federal government had been informed about this individual and the alleged crimes he had committed in those states? Because he could have been deported if that was the case. Was there a breakdown in the system?
So, Margaret, there are a number of cities around the country that have varying degrees of cooperation with the immigration authorities. We firmly believe that
New York did not?
We firmly believe that if a city is aware of an individual who poses a threat to public safety, then we would request that they provide us with that information so that we can ensure that that individual is detained if the facts so warrant.
We firmly believe that cities should cooperate, and we request that they do so. That's charming, isn't it? Oh, well, if you firmly believe and you put in the request, then, well, we have no problem here. Funny. when this guy and his boss, the president, when they firmly believe that Texas shouldn't put up razor wire to protect the border, do they gently request that Texas do so? Or do they take them to the Supreme Court to force them to take down the razor wire? It's amazing what they do when they're really motivated. We firmly believe that cities should cooperate with ICE. Really, did you make them? Did you force them to? Did you use your political influence, since they're your party members, the mayor of New York, the governor of New York, who love to grandstand on their sanctuary policies and virtue signal about they're there to embrace people, and we're going to stand by what the Statue of Liberty says, no matter what our immigration policies or border security policies are. Did you ever do anything about it, Alejandro? We firmly believe that cities should cooperate, and we put in the request to cooperate. Here's the answer to the question that he refused. No. New York never notified ICE that they had an illegal alien they had just arrested. If they did that, there'd be a pipeline of people waiting for deportation. Democrats don't want to do that. And they won't unless they're forced to do it by law. And they need to be forced by law. This president won't do it. And by the way, in a weird way, you just heard Alejandro Mayorkas, in a backhanded way, throw these fellow Democrats and cities under the bus for their sanctuary policies, right? Yeah. This happened because they didn't notify us. We request they would. Some cities are better than others. But if they had let us know, we would have deported this guy. No, they wouldn't have. No, they wouldn't have. And even if he claims now that they would have, and the real problem here is that they didn't inform us that they had arrested him, we would have deported him, and then this woman would be alive. No, not so fast, Jack. Because the very first people to have this murderer in custody was not the city of New York and not the city of Atlanta. It was his guys, the ICE officials and Border Patrol down at the border when he crossed illegally in the first place. They had him in custody. And under the last president, he would have been arrested, he would have been processed, and he would have been put back in Mexico. But under this president, under this Secretary of Homeland Security, they reinstituted catch and release. So don't say, if New York and Atlanta had just let us know. No. You knew. You had him, and you released him. And it's your fault. And everybody knows it, no matter how much you try to lie. Boy, what a Monday. We are just getting started. It's going to be a hell of a week, and you better make sure you're here for it. Because all that stuff I said about The View and MSNBC and the mainstream media and how their viewers are uninformed and they're ignorant and they're completely ill-informed about what's going on, the opposite is true of you. You're bright. You're smart. You seek out analysis and opinions. You sit here for over an hour every day at noon here on Rumble, and you hear what's going on and full-blown comprehensive breakdowns of what's going on in this country. And we just hit 4 or 5 stories a day. Thank God you continue to do that, and you'll continue to do so in the future. Subscribe, please, so you don't miss an episode. I love it when you subscribe on some of those other video servicing sites, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or whatever, because it forces those big tech monsters to actually go out of their way to let you know that we've got a new show. Meanwhile, Rumble, they're not monsters. They're fabulous. They're wonderful. And they'll notify you too. But you got to subscribe. Or subscribe to our audio-only podcast over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to hear your podcast. And make sure you catch our videos as well across all the Town Hall sites if that's where you're watching. Thanks so much today for watching us. My name is Larry O'Connor, but I really wish you'd just call me Larry.